Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Seaman and I'm the Director of People-to-People Recruitment in South Australia. I'm very excited to host today's webinar, Finding a Job in Adelaide. Before we do get started, I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Kaurna people, traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to the elders, past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Allow me to introduce you to the team who will be joining me today. Ellis Fielding, who will be providing CV and resume tips. Jessica Bales, who will be discussing how to prepare for face-to-face versus virtual interviews. And Sylvia Shahodson, who will be sharing tips on counter-offer management. There'll be an opportunity to answer your questions, so please feel free to drop questions in the chat box below. But let's jump straight into it and take a look at the South Australian job market. The South Australian job market has flourished in 2022 with a strong 30.6% increase in job advertisements across South Australia. The current job market is 81.4% larger today than it was pre-pandemic. And as of July 2022, the national unemployment rate is 3.4%. We continue to see the unemployment rate trend down across all states and territories, and unemployment in South Australia during COVID peaked at nearly 10% in 2020 and has now dropped to 4% as of July 2022. Despite having the highest unemployment across the country, we are just shy of our record, which was 3.8% in December. Organisations are planning to recruit in South Australia this year. Approximately only 24% of organisations are not looking to recruit in their organisations, and the rest are. So you can see here via this chart that there's 26% that are looking to replace existing roles. 38% are looking at assisting with their current growth, and 12% are looking to drive change. What that does relate to in regards to organisations expecting the growth is 15% are looking at rapid growth this year, 52% are looking at steady growth in 2022, 12% are looking at a slow recovery, and only 21% are looking at stabilising or downturn. Jobs in demand with people-to-people clients in South Australia. At the moment, we are seeing a number of vacancies across executive assistants and personal assistants, finance officers, HR and recruitment at all levels, so anything from a coordinator level right through to management, IT levels or IT at all levels, so anything from service desk right through to IT managers, legal assistants and warehouse officers. Okay, so let's get Ellis Fielding on to talk to you about how to make sure your resume cover and stand out, a cover letter stand out, and to your next employer. Ellis is a recruitment consultant in our Adelaide office, and he assists in our supply chain clients to find temporary employees. Ellis has joined our team this year, all the way from Manchester in the UK. So over to you, Ellis.
Hi guys, as Peter mentioned, I'll be running through the do's and don'ts of preparing your resume and covering letter. It's now more important than ever to ensure that your resume and covering letter are written and suited to each individual role that you're applying for to capture the attention of the employer. The main purpose of the resume and the covering letter are to accurately display your working background and all your qualifications, which will entice employers to decide whether you're suitable for a particular role. To begin with, I'm going to show you an example of a resume which has been poorly structured. Please note that this is actually an extreme version of a poor resume. The first thing you would want to do is take a look at the border. this just is universally regarded as unprofessional. I just wouldn't recommend doing it in any instance. You can notice at the top you've got the name in a different font. I wouldn't recommend doing that. You want to kind of keep it consistent all the way through your CV. The fonts I would typically recommend using are Times New Roman, Arial, and Calibri Body. The colouring of the writing, you want to keep it in standard black. As always, you don't want to make it. It's not a piece of art. This is a document that you send into a company. I wouldn't recommend using your full address purely just for privacy purposes. I would just definitely recommend using your suburban state, and just so people know roughly where you are. And obviously, if you end up with the position, that's when you can provide your full details. You can see on here as well that they've centralized all the text. It makes it really difficult to read, and if your resume is actually difficult to read 9 out of 10 times, the hiring manager just won't read it regardless of your expertise. So you just be disregarded just for the fact of the way that your CVs or your resume is set out. I would always try to keep your resume to 2 pages maximum. Anything more than that, it becomes overkill. You must remember that hiring managers are people as well, so they don't want to read through pages of the same thing. In reality, they're only looking to answer 2 questions: is this person capable of doing this role, and does this person have the relevant experience and qualifications? Everything else they will want to know, they will ask you on a phone screen and at the interview stages. So you want to keep it clear and concise always. Finally, you want to avoid sharing your opinions on the company and your previous roles in the past. You want to keep it to exactly what you've done. You don't need to share any thoughts about management or anything like that. It's just you want to keep it definitely factual. Jumping on to the better version of a resume, you can notice that it's really very well set out on this one. The font, the layout is massively easier to read and navigate. There's headings on there which are bolded and larger. The address only contains a suburban state, like I said. That is all that's required to be able to find. You want to put your contact details on there, which is your mobile and your email address. You can also include a home phone if you do use a home phone as well. There's no harm in that. What I would say, at the top there, you've got a professional summary. That should only be 4 or 5 lines long, giving you a brief overview of your working history and skills. The length of tenure of each role in your work experience should be clearly stated. So you want to have the dates of you started and finished, just so hiring managers can actually see when you started and when you left, to see how long you actually stayed in a role. And it should go in chronological order, so it should always start with your most current position and work your way down to your first position. That way they can see where you've progressed from. You can see that the work experience is specific and only focuses on the job roles that they have that you've entailed during that time during the role. So you don't want to you want to make sure that you're using all the duties that you did and putting them onto paper. Now, there are also different ways of formatting your resume as well. So depending on the role that you're applying for, such as if a role requires specific qualifications, I'd recommend putting your qualifications at the top of your CV so it stands out more to the hiring manager. Now, on the other hand, if it doesn't require qualifications, then I would then put them at the bottom and then let your work experience and history shine through. Covering letters are actually really easy, so it doesn't really take much long to talk about those. What I would recommend is that you use the job advert as a guideline. So if you're able to dual screen, have the job advert open on one screen and your Word document on the other, and take points out of the duties that the role is required, and then revert it back to you and how you have you've completed that similar task in the past, and that way you can demonstrate your value that way. Yeah, that's pretty much the do's and don'ts of writing a CV, Peter.
Thank you very much, Ellis. I do have a couple of questions for you.
Of course.
So and there are a couple of questions from the group as well. So I'd like to know, should I add my photo to my resume?
The photos is always a really difficult one to navigate. I would personally say no, and it doesn't really affect me when making a decision when I do see a resume. The issue with putting a photo on there, it does open you up to discrimination straight away. You don't want that. If some hiring managers, they might be that type of person, so you just want to take that possibility away from the situation straight away. There is no harm in it, but yeah, I absolutely wouldn't do it.
Thank you. What about my referees? Should I add my referees' details to my resume?
No, I would always put the references at the bottom. So I would just put references available on request, and at that point you can then give your references out to people that actually require them, rather than just having them on a document and having their number and things. When you're applying for jobs, people will be seeing these numbers, and it just privacy wise, it works miles better when you can give it to people who actually need them.
Thank you for that. And I always wonder whether I should be putting my personal details. So things like my date of birth, address, where I live. Are those things important to add to my resume?
Well, as I mentioned, obviously the suburb is definitely something that I would put in, just so people know kind of where you are roughly. Your full address, definitely not. It's just privacy wise again. Date of birth is kind of the same, privacy, and it opens you up again to discrimination, along pretty much the exact same as your photo. You don't want to give someone an excuse to disregard your CV without actually looking at your CV first. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't include your date of birth or your full address. Just the suburb is fine.
Thank you, appreciate that. We have had a couple of questions from our viewers. So one of the questions is from Tommy. He said, I got laid off back in 2020 after my job went under from COVID. I was only there for a short amount of time, so about 9 months. Should I include this time period in my CV or just leave it out?
Yes, I absolutely, because all experience or any experience is good experience. I would just be totally honest on your CV and just give all your duties, and then you could even give a reason why that role was you're no longer in that role to justify it, obviously, and just be open and honest about that situation. If everyone's been through COVID in the whole world, so everyone's going to understand that trouble. So yeah, absolutely put it on your CV, because you'd rather not have a gap in you'd rather not have a gap on your CV. It looks a lot worse having 9 months out of work rather than 9 months in a position that sadly didn't work out.
Great, thanks, Ellis. And I agree, Tommy. I think a lot of people were in a similar situation in 2020. So I think you'll find that a number of people will really understand what that situation was like. So we've also had another question from a person called Naya. Is it better to have a shorter CV, such as a one-page highlighting main points, or just include everything?
So I would always keep it to 2 pages maximum. I wouldn't go any longer than that. It does depend on how much work experience you've had. Now, obviously, if for like myself, my work experience didn't start until 2016, so my CV isn't that long, but obviously there are people who have a working life that started in 1970, 1980, which I wouldn't really include that time frame. I would probably go as far back as maybe 10 to 15 years, depending on the roles that you've done. If they're higher skilled roles, I would definitely include them, but I wouldn't include, for example, working in a retail store in 1980. You don't need to put that in there. Obviously, just anything that is relevant to the role that you're applying for, definitely put on there.
Great, thank you. That does answer all the questions we've had so far. If there are other questions, we can come back to Ellis a little bit later. But thank you, Ellis, for your handy tips on how to make my resume stand out. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jessica Bales. Jess has recently returned to our team after taking some time out of her career to welcome her son Taj into the world. Jess works alongside Ellis in our supply chain team, and Jess is going to talk to you about how to prepare for face-to-face versus a virtual interview. I'll hand over to you now, Jess.
Thank you, Peter, and hello to everyone watching. So since COVID took the world by storm, virtual interviews became just as common, if not more common, than face-to-face interviews. Thankfully, things are beginning to return back to normal and most people are back in the office again. However, virtual interviews are still happening where necessary. There are a lot of similarities in the preparation process for a face-to-face and a virtual interview. However, there are a few things you need to do differently when it comes to preparing for a virtual interview. Firstly, the most important factor is make sure your equipment and setup are ready. I can't tell you how many virtual interviews I've done where the candidate's camera or microphone hasn't been working, or they struggle to figure out how to get on if they haven't used Microsoft Teams or Zoom before. Sometimes their internet connection is terrible, so it drops in and out or freezes throughout the interview, which can be extremely distracting and frustrating. So it's super important you do a test run first, set up a virtual meeting with a friend or family member and make sure everything works correctly. Ensure your background isn't full of clutter and you have adequate lighting. It's best to sit in front of a window or in front of a in a well-lit room so the interviewee can see you well. If you don't have access to a computer, as a last resort, you can use your phone. However, it's important that the phone isn't held in your hand. Prop it up on a shelf or on your windowsill, and once again, ensure your background isn't full of clutter and looks nice. There's nothing worse than interviewing someone who's holding their phone in their hand and it's moving around or shaking. It can make it seem as though you're unprepared and it can be very distracting. When it comes to what to wear in a virtual interview, obviously the interviewee is only going to be seeing you from the waist up in most occasions, so you can get away with wearing your slippers, but please ensure you're dressed appropriately up top, you're well presented, and remember that it's always better to be overdressed than underdressed. Regardless of whether the interview is virtual or face-to-face, here are some important things to undertake in your preparation process. So firstly, research the company and the person or persons conducting the interview. You can then drop comments throughout the interview about anything you've learned while researching. A great topic is the career progression of the person interviewing you. Check out their LinkedIn profile and see how long they've been in the role, what they were doing beforehand. It will stroke their ego while making you look super prepared and knowledgeable, and it will also help you come up with questions you can ask at the end of the interview, which I'll go over shortly. Number 2, arrive no more than 5 to 10 minutes early. Arriving too early can bother the persons interviewing you as they'll feel rushed to get out to you. Obviously, arriving late is not a good look either, so jump on Google Maps, work out how long it will take you to get there and where to park. Often trying to find a park is why people arrive late, so please take this into consideration when working out your travel time. If the interview is virtual, then jump on 2 minutes before the start time. Number 3, you will be asked to give examples of your experience. They may ask something like, tell me about a time you had to work to a strict deadline. It's very important when answering these types of questions that you give them one specific example. Don't generalize and don't over answer by giving multiple examples. Think of one time, and it's best to answer them with a STAR response, which is situation, set the scene, task, describe the purpose, action, explain what you did, and result, share the outcome. Number 4 is have prepared questions to ask at the end of the interview when asked. It's best to write these down so you don't forget. Some great examples of questions you can ask are, what does a typical day in this role look like? What are the biggest challenges I will face in the role? What projects is the company currently working on? What is the progression path from this role? You can ask about the career progression of the person interviewing. This is where you can use the research you did on their LinkedIn page and mention that you saw they've worked for the company for X amount of years and open up a discussion about their time with the company. Some other great questions are, how would you describe the culture of the business? What attributes do your top performers have? What do you like about working for the company? What would some of your advice be to someone starting out in the company? Once your questions have been answered and the interview is wrapped up, if they haven't told you already, you can ask when you can expect to hear from them as to whether you're being progressed to the next stage. Then it's super important that you stand up, thank them for your time, and shake their hands confidently. Hopefully you're the right person for the job and you'll hear back from them within a few days. That's it from me.
Thank you, Jess. I particularly like the example of how to set out the way I respond to a question, because it is a bit difficult to think about on the spot, how do I answer this question? So it gives me the ability to be able to think about that beforehand. So I appreciate that. We have had a couple of questions from our viewers today. So our first question is from Amir, and he has asked, could you please shed some light on work from home, remote, hybrid work? compare to on-site roles in South Australia?
Sure. So it's quite common at the moment that everyone is doing hybrid roles. So ourselves as recruiters, we work some days from home and some in the office. That is a question you can ask. Is this role a hybrid role? What are your flexible work options? Do you offer them? And if that's the case, then you want to make sure you've got your setup all correct at home, just like you would for a virtual interview. Make sure everything's ready to go. And if you need any assistance from the company then with setting up everything, then you can just let them know.
Thanks, Jess. I definitely agree. There's a combination of employment in South Australia at the moment, which does provide work from home and remote options, but most commonly I would say we see the hybrid option, where we're really looking at anywhere between a mix of 2 to 3 days working from home and the remainder in the office, and we're seeing that with a number of clients at the moment in South Australia. So I think there's definitely those options still out there. The next question we have is from Naya. What way of interviewing do you think will be the preferred moving forward? Are we likely to stay with the virtual or face-to-face meeting becoming more common again?
So face-to-face is definitely preferred. For me personally, you can get a feel for a person, a much better feel for a person when you're meeting them face-to-face. You can pick up on their energy and see their body language a lot more. So a lot of people do prefer face-to-face for that reason, but obviously there's always going to be times that virtual interviews are necessary in regards to whatever happens in the future with another COVID outbreak, or perhaps you're in another state. But face-to-face is coming back to being the most normal way of interviewing at the moment. So, yeah.
Excellent. To add to Jess, I think we are definitely seeing a combination. So we're seeing a combination of clients still working with the virtual interviews, especially for speed, to be able to get in front of you, or convenience. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to get on a virtual meeting than it is to meet someone with a face-to-face, but we're definitely seeing clients more and more leaning towards bringing people into their offices. It gives them an opportunity to see the office space and get a feel for the culture and whether this company or the role is right for them. We do have one more question from Arn. Right now I'm waiting on my visa to get granted, and I've been told that when I get there to Adelaide, I would have plenty of matters to sort out first, like bank accounts, driver's license. And I want to know, is it possible to find a job before arriving and start the job after a month or so of arrival? That's a very good question, and I think each individual situation is very unique. Some people may arrive in Australia and be able to find themselves a position very quickly and get themselves sorted fast. I think it's, I've moved interstate. I haven't moved overseas, so it's hard for me to know or to give you a bit of an understanding of exactly what you're going to have to do. But I do believe there is definitely things that you're going to have to sort out when you get here. So housing, one of them, if you haven't already before you've got here, driver's license, your bank details, you'll need to get all of your tax file number and things like that sorted before you will be able to start work. But there is, like we've talked about already, the unemployment rate for South Australia at the moment is 4%, and we're seeing that across the country. So there are more vacancies than we've had more recently. So I think there is the opportunity to do so. I hope that answers your question. All right, well, thank you very much, Jess, for your time and giving us a bit of an understanding of the difference between a virtual and a face-to-face interview. Interviews have definitely changed over the past couple of years, and I appreciate all of your tips. Our third speaker today, Sylvia, has spent more than 10 years in retail leadership and joined P2P a couple of years ago and heads up our permanent business support desk. She is going to talk to you today about managing counteroffers. So Sylvia, before I hand over to you, can you tell me about what is a counteroffer and what does it look like?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Hi everyone. So today I'll be taking you through counter offer management, what a counter offer actually is, why they are made, and key things to consider if you are presented with one. So what is a counter offer? A counter offer is essentially an offer made from your current employer in response to an offer received by another employer. A counter offer generally aims to compete with the offer received to convince you to stay at your existing job and ultimately decline your new job offer. The market at the moment is extremely competitive, and we have seen a significant increase in counter offers in the past year or so. So if you are looking to move on from your current role, especially if you work in an industry that is experiencing a skills shortage, you may likely encounter one. So typically a counter offer can look like a salary increase, growth opportunities, a promotion, more flexibility, change in the days and hours that you work, increased responsibilities or duties, or a new job title. So why are counter offers made? Counter offers generally made because it can often be easier to keep an employee in the role and business that already has the right skills for the role and is a good culture fit, rather than having to find a replacement. The recruitment process is not an easy one. It requires time, money, and the right resources to replace you. And this is something that your current employer might not have. Therefore, it is likely that if they can avoid this process, they will. So I guess my tip for you, for anyone looking for a new role, would be, I guess, before you even start looking for new opportunities, would be to really think about your motivations and objectives for wanting to move on. If your reasoning is based around wanting a pay increase, more work from home flexibility, or needing uh, um, more work from home flexibility or responsibility, I would first and foremost be having that conversation with your manager and exploring whether they can work with you on any of your objectives. This will obviously save you and your employer time. And in the end, if you still decide to move on, you know that you've at least covered all bases. So what are some key things to consider if you are presented with a counter offer? Well, first of all, it may not guarantee job satisfaction. A counter offer may give hope of a better culture, work-life balance, or an increased salary. But once the high of a new title and bump in salary wears off, we find that typically 90% of people who accept a counter offer leave within 12 months. The main reason that you wanted to leave in the first place still may not have been addressed, or worse, the finer points of your counter offer never actually materialise. When presented with a counter offer that promises a boost in salary, do keep in mind your reasons for wanting to quit. Workplace mental health and a lack of emphasis on employee well-being is a common theme, and these aren't things that will be solved by simply increasing pay. Another thing to keep in mind is that your loyalty may be questioned. So if you decide to accept the counter offer, keep in mind that that trust might be lost from both your manager and fellow colleagues. You might have accepted a new challenge or pay rise when accepting a counter offer. So keep in mind that your employer may demand more of you in this instance. And your resignation will be remembered. And if you've stayed for more money, your loyalty might be questioned. Another thing to consider is your employer doesn't know how long you will stay with the business. So if you accept your employer's counteroffer, they'll probably always wonder, even if this thought isn't voiced, how long you will stay with the company, seeing as you wanted to leave. You might be considered more expendable than other employees who haven't quit, and this might mean you're vulnerable to cuts in the future. And lastly, you might miss a valuable opportunity elsewhere. So many clients who have accepted a counter offer only to end up disappointed return in the hope that the position they were going for hasn't been filled. In some cases, we are able to put them back on track to secure the role, but all too often candidates miss out on incredible opportunities when originally choosing to stay put. So how to consider or decline a counter offer and next steps. I would always ask for some time to consider everything. And from there, if you do decide to decline, it's important to be polite and professional and keep your discussion with your manager short and specific. Always thank your current employer for the opportunity to work for the organisation and that you appreciate them wanting to keep you, but your decision has already been made. From here, a letter of resignation is written to announce your intention to leave your current position. And in this letter, you include your notice period. Your notice period commences from when you hand in your letter of resignation and ends on your last day of work. The length of your notice period can vary, and you can find this requirement in your employment contract. So that's a quick overview of counter offer management. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Sylvia. We do have one question from Isabel. Would it be better to accept a job with a higher salary but doesn't offer as much growth opportunity as my current role, but they aren't willing to offer any pay increases. What would you advise?
That is a really good question. I guess you have to really sit down and think about your future goals. That's what I would do first of all. And, the main thing that you're looking for, is it a pay increase? Are you in a position where you need that extra money, or is growth more important to you? So I guess if your current employer is offering you growth and you like working there, it's a good culture, I would certainly stick it out with them. I think remain loyal. Um, but if it's money, then I would be looking at the other offer.
Thank you, Sylvia. I definitely think it's one of those questions that a lot of people ask themselves. Do I stay here and take what they're offering, or do I go? And I think, again, reiterating what Sylvia said, you really need to understand your motivators in the first place. So why am I looking elsewhere in the first place? And really understand, is that salary, is it about the career development, or is it something else entirely? And make sure that you're taking that into consideration before you do make your decision. So, thank you, Sylvia, for your insights on managing counteroffer and helping me understand what it looks like a little bit better. I know for me, it can look so different, so it's good to know what different types of ways a counteroffer can look. That does conclude our finding a job in Adelaide today. We hope you enjoyed hearing from our three speakers, Ellis, Jess, and Sylvia, and gained some helpful tips to help you finding your next job. If you are looking for a new role or considering a career change, please feel free to contact our team in the Adelaide office on 08 8317 4800. Our team are always here to help and would love to help you find your dream job. So thank you for your time.